Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. In this tutorial, we're going to learn the basics of how web works. We're going to touch base on things like website files, web servers, IP addresses, domain names, what's DNS, the basics of browsers, DNS, all good stuff, right? So I'll start with the website, right? What what does the website consist of? It consists of HTML files, some CSS files, and some JavaScript files. HTML is used to structure your website. CSS is used for styling. JavaScript or any other programming language for that matter would be used for to provide functionality, right? Now, if that's your web page, for instance, anything to do with, for example, the text, where you put them, and the if there's an image, where does it go, things like that. That's related to the structure. So obviously that's covered. Um, that's part of HTML. Anything to do with styling, such as the color of text, the font size, and all that good stuff goes to CSS. And anything that has to do with functionality, such as if there's a button, you press on the button and then there is an action. Such kind of stuff would be handled by JavaScript. Now, another important concept to touch on is web server. Now, obviously, once you have developed your website, you would put them on a web server so other people can have an access to it. So that's your web server. You put all your files, and essentially, web server packages all your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that goes to the web server. It packages it, and on the web server, obviously it would be somewhere on. It would have some path. For example, the HTML was uh, test.html, and there it goes, right? Uh, there are few famous examples for servers. Like a good name is like Apache, Nginx. These ones are for Linux. The common one for Windows is IIS, right? That's for Windows. And your users would basically interact with your web server, and then web servers would respond back. The other important concept to touch on is the idea of IP address. Now, every device on the internet has to have an IP address. Um, and we use IPv4. There is IPv6, but that's currently not used. We use IPv4 for all the communication over the internet. Now, there could be local IP address as well as global. Local is only local to the network. So, for example, in your office, you have a modem, right? And then you have a PC1, PC2, and up to so a PCN. So all these uh, will communicate using, that's your local network. And if that's your website, if that's your web server, which is hosting your website, right? Now, since it's outside of your local network, the modem will have a global IP address through which it would communicate with the website. Now, as I mentioned, every device needs to have an IP address, and website is no different. So we need to assign an IP address to website, right? Now there are two types of IP address. One is dynamic, the other one is static. Dynamic is Dynamic keeps on changing if you reconnect to the internet, but for websites we need static, something like which doesn't change at all. So now once you define a static IP to your website, the next thing is domain name. So domain name is essentially the name for your website. And let's say you pick up the name of your domain like test.com. There is an organization called ICANN which registers all your domains basically. So all your big uh, websites like Microsoft or Google, all their domains are registered with it, or even like the small websites. But I'm just naming them because they are famous, right? And the process of registering your domain goes something like this. You have something called like registrars, and there are multiple registrars. A good, for example, like GoDaddy and things like that, right? So there is this website owner, and then that's your ICANN. So the owner would talk to the registrar, and there would be some fee, for example, $10 a year for hosting, for registering your domain, right? And then they would register it with ICANN. Let's say if this test.com domain name already exists, obviously, then you wouldn't be able to register it. But that's how generally the process goes. The owner talks to the registrar, and then registrar on your behalf registers it with ICANN. Now there is another important concept which is called DNS, domain name server, right? Uh, and basically this server has a list of all the mappings from domain to IP. So, for example, test.com, and then whatever the IP we had assigned to our like uh, like whatever like that thing, right? Another important thing is the idea of ports. So each machine, like PC, has different channels of communication. These are called as ports, right? Generally speaking, the ports that are used for communication on the internet are port 80 and port 443. This one is used for HTTP and this one is used for HTTPS. Now, HTTPS is not secured and HTTPS is secured because HTTPS uses SSL, and that's a secured mechanism. To highlight like what's the issue with HTTP, let me make up a diagram. For example, that's user one and that's your website. So in HTTP, what happens? The communication is unsecured. It's not locked. So which means anyone on the internet could essentially see it, and uh, essentially the information is not locked. So anything like login or passwords, the communication is not secured. Whereas on using HTTPS, the information is secured. And how it's secured? The information while the user is sending it gets locked, and on the website when it reaches it gets unlocked here, And similarly, if anything, the website sends, it locks first and then it's unlocked here, which means anyone who is trying to access things like your login or password would not be able to do so. Another important component in all this process is browsers. Now, there are multiple browsers in the market like Microsoft Edge, Google Chrome, Safari, Firefox, and the way how each one of them renders your HTML and CSS could differ a lot, which is why it is recommended if you build your website, you test them on all major browsers like Edge, Chrome, just to make sure your website is functioning properly. Because, for example, a tag, let's say a, a tag can be implemented differently in Edge and Chrome, and you want to make sure the results are optimum for both. So, putting all of these things together, what we have covered in this lesson, the process is like you put your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, images, all of these on your web server, right? And then it could operate on port 80 or port, let's say 443, which is secured. The website will have an IP address of some sort, right? Static IP. And then it will have a domain name. The DNS will have the mappings from the IP address to the domain name, right? And then the when the user pings DNS saying this test.com, it would provide the IP address and then it would go towards the server and then basically the HTML and JavaScript, all the files would be loaded here as a web page. So essentially you would have loaded all your files on the web server. So that's pretty much it we need to know, at least for the web development. Um, there are a lot of details I've skipped on purpose, but that's the bare minimum we need to know to start the basics of the web development. See you in another tutorial. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.